In Maplewood, a deadly industrial accident leaves a community in ruins. Amid the devastation, Naomi Carter, a determined black lawyer, steps forward to fight for justice against a powerful corporation responsible for the tragedy. The odds were stacked against Naomi from the start, with the community devastated and a wealthy, untouchable corporation standing in her way. She knew this case was more than just a legal battle. It was a fight for justice. But just when the case seemed lost, an unexpected twist would change everything. A former insider, willing to risk it all, stepped forward with explosive information that could turn the tide. As Naomi took on the ruthless CEO, Victor Langston, she had to make a choice: expose the truth and risk everything, or let the powerful forces win. Will her courage be enough to change the course of history, or will the system prove too powerful to overcome? Keep watching to find out. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, and be the first to hear our incredible new stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The mid-afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows of Naomi Carter's modest yet well-organized office. The walls were lined with bookshelves packed with legal tomes, and her desk bore the marks of countless battles fought in the name of justice. Naomi, dressed in a sharp navy blue blazer, sat with her hands clasped, staring at the framed photo of her late grandmother, a civil rights activist who had inspired her career. Naomi's fierce eyes were a mirror of her relentless determination, even as the weight of being underestimated in the courtroom lingered in the back of her mind. The knock on her door was hesitant, a soft tap that barely broke her concentration. "Come in," Naomi called, her voice steady, though curiosity flickered across her face. The door opened slowly, revealing a group of 5 individuals: 3 women, a middle-aged man, and a little girl clutching a ragged teddy bear. Their clothes were plain but neat, their faces weary yet hopeful. There was something in their eyes that told Naomi they were here, because they had nowhere else to turn. The man stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. "Ms. Carter, my name is James Hensley," he began. "We've heard about you, how you help people like us. We're here because, well, we need someone brave enough to stand up to Silvercrest Industries." Naomi's expression shifted immediately, her mind sharpening. Silvercrest. The name alone was enough to send ripples through the legal world. The multi-billion-dollar corporation had a reputation for destroying anyone who dared oppose it. "Have a seat," Naomi said, gesturing to the chairs across from her desk. The group shuffled into place, their movements careful and deliberate, as if afraid to break something fragile. James continued, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "They built a chemical plant near our neighborhood 2 years ago. At first, we didn't think much of it. But then the air started to smell different, sharp, almost metallic. People started getting sick. My wife, she got these terrible rashes. Doctors couldn't figure it out. And then my little boy," his voice faltered, tears pooling in his eyes. One of the women, holding back her own tears, picked up where James left off. "He passed away last year. He was only 8. We thought it was pneumonia, but the doctors later said it was something toxic in his system. That's when we knew it was Silvercrest plant. They've been dumping chemicals into the air and water, and now it's killing us." Naomi's heart clenched, but her expression remained composed. "Have you tried taking this to court?" she asked. Another woman, her face lined with exhaustion, answered bitterly, "We tried. Their lawyers crushed us. They claimed there was no proof, that it could have been anything, and then they started threatening us, calling our jobs, harassing our families. Everyone else backed out of the case. We're the only ones left." The little girl clutched her teddy bear tighter, her wide eyes staring at Naomi with a mix of fear and hope. Naomi felt a pang of anger, a deep sense of injustice that burned within her. These people weren't just victims of corporate greed. They were survivors, clinging to the faintest glimmer of hope that someone would fight for them. "Why me?" Naomi asked, her voice calm but curious. "You know what kind of power Silvercrest has. You know how they operate. Why come to me, knowing what you're up against?" James took a deep breath. "Because you don't back down. We've read about your cases. You take on the ones no one else will touch. You fight for people like us, people who don't have money or connections. If anyone can stand up to them, it's you." Naomi leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She knew the stakes. Taking on Silvercrest meant not just risking her career, but also inviting relentless scrutiny and potential threats. She had seen what corporations like this could do: bury lawsuits under mountains of paperwork, intimidate witnesses, and exploit every loophole in the system. But as she looked at the faces before her, the pain, the desperation, the quiet determination, she felt the familiar spark of resolve ignite within her. "Tell me everything," Naomi said, reaching for a notepad. Over the next hour, the group recounted every detail of their ordeal. The chemical plant's sudden construction, the strange illnesses, the mounting deaths, and Silvercrest's cold indifference. They described how the corporation had offered small payouts to families in exchange for silence, a tactic designed to erase their culpability without admitting guilt. Naomi listened intently, her pen flying across the page. The more she heard, the angrier she became. This wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate, calculated harm. And the fact that Silvercrest thought they could get away with it only fueled her determination. After the group finished their story, Naomi stood and grabbed her coat. "I need to see it for myself," she said. The drive to the affected neighborhood was somber. As Naomi approached, the air grew heavy with an acrid smell that stung her nose and throat. She passed rows of abandoned homes, their windows shattered and walls stained. The once vibrant community was now a ghost town, its residents driven out by sickness and despair. Naomi stepped out of her car and walked through the empty streets. A few residents lingered, their expressions wary but curious as they watched her. She stopped in front of one house where a woman was sitting on the porch, her hands trembling as she peeled an orange. "Ms. Carter?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. "Are you really here to help us?" Naomi nodded. "I'm here to fight for you. For all of you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. No one else would. They said it was hopeless. Naomi crouched down to meet her gaze. "It's not hopeless," she said firmly. "But it won't be easy. Silvercrest is powerful, and they'll do everything they can to stop us. But I promise you this, I will not back down. Not until justice is served." As Naomi stood, her resolve solidified. The devastation she had witnessed, the stories she had heard, they weren't just statistics or anecdotes. They were lives, real people who deserved better. She knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but she also knew she couldn't walk away. Returning to her office late that night, Naomi sat at her desk, staring at the mountain of work that awaited her. Research, evidence collection, witness preparation. It was a daunting task. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose that outweighed the fear. She reached for the photo of her grandmother and held it tightly. "I'm doing this for them," she whispered. "For all the people who think they don't have a voice. I'll be their voice. And I won't stop until they're heard." With that, she began drafting the lawsuit that would set the stage for the battle of her career. A battle against one of the most powerful corporations in the country. Naomi Carter wasted no time after agreeing to take on the case against Silvercrest Industries. She filed a lawsuit with precision, her years of experience guiding her through the intricate legal maneuvers necessary to make a compelling opening strike. The case was detailed, citing environmental negligence, endangerment of public health, and a deliberate disregard for safety regulations. The victims' testimonies and medical records formed the backbone of her argument. But Naomi knew this was just the beginning. Almost immediately, the backlash began. Silvercrest's PR machine went into overdrive, launching a well-coordinated smear campaign. The media, saturated with carefully placed stories, began questioning Naomi's motives. One article labeled her a glory-seeking lawyer trying to exploit a tragedy, while another accused her of using the victims as pawns in a personal vendetta. Paid commentators flooded online forums and social media with doubts about her credibility. They painted her as an opportunist and suggested that the victims' illnesses were the result of poor lifestyle choices rather than Silvercrest negligence. Naomi didn't flinch. She had been underestimated her entire career and knew how to handle attacks on her character. However, her clients were another story. The victims, already vulnerable and emotionally exhausted, began to waver. James Hensley, the unofficial spokesperson for the group, called her one evening, his voice trembling with fear. "They've been calling my job, Miss Carter," he confessed. "I'm scared they're going to get me fired. And the others, they're worried about their families. They don't know if they can keep going." Naomi took a deep breath, her grip tightening on the phone. "James, listen to me," she said firmly. "This is exactly what they want, to scare you into giving up. But if we back down now, they'll win. Not just this case, but the right to keep hurting people like you. Trust me, we're stronger together." Her words reassured him for the moment, but Naomi knew the pressure on her clients wouldn't let up. She needed a breakthrough. Hashtag, a hidden ally emerges. One evening, as Naomi reviewed case files in her office, her intern, Devin Miles, knocked and entered, his expression a mix of excitement and trepidation. Devin, a second-year law student with a passion for justice, had proven to be an invaluable part of her team. "I think I found something," he said, holding a folder of documents. "I was digging through some public records and cross-referencing Silvercrest financial reports. There are discrepancies. Payments to offshore accounts labeled as operational costs. But here's the kicker. Some of the payments are tied to a subsidiary that doesn't seem to exist." Naomi's interest was piqued. She flipped through the documents as Devin explained further. The subsidiary was listed as handling waste management, yet there were no public filings, no employees, and no physical address. It was a shell company, and Devin suspected it was being used to hide illegal operations. "This could be it," Naomi said, her mind racing. "If we can link this to the toxic chemicals affecting the community, we'll have a smoking gun." But there was a problem. The evidence was incomplete, just enough to raise questions but not enough to prove wrongdoing. Naomi instructed Devin to keep digging while warning him to be cautious. She knew Silvercrest wouldn't hesitate to retaliate if they realized someone was getting too close to the truth. Hashtag, the pressure mounts. As Naomi focused on building her case, the pressure on her from all sides intensified. Her firm's senior partners summoned her to a meeting, their expressions a mixture of concern and frustration. "Naomi, we admire your dedication," said one of the partners, an older man with a carefully measured tone. "But this case is problematic. Silvercrest is one of the wealthiest corporations in the country, and we can't afford to alienate potential high-profile clients. You're putting the firm at risk." Naomi squared her shoulders. "I'm putting myself at risk, not the firm. And this case is about justice for people who've been ignored for far too long. I won't abandon them." The partner leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You've built a solid reputation here, Naomi. Don't throw it away on a fight you can't win." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she remained calm. "If fighting for what's right costs me my reputation, then so be it. I won't back down." Her resolve was unshakable. But the conversation left her feeling isolated. She knew she couldn't count on her firm's full support, and that meant she had to be even more strategic. Hashtag, Evelyn Hart, the opponent. Meanwhile, Silvercrest's legal team, led by the formidable Evelyn Hart, wasted no time exploiting every loophole they could find. Evelyn was a legend in the legal world, brilliant, ruthless, and unrelenting. She had a knack for turning the law into a weapon, bending it to suit her clients' needs. Evelyn's first move was to file motion after motion, delaying the case and forcing Naomi to spend precious time and resources countering them. Each delay was calculated to exhaust Naomi and frustrate her clients. During a preliminary hearing, Evelyn stood confidently, her tailored suit and commanding presence dominating the courtroom. "Your Honor," she said, her voice smooth and persuasive, "this case is built on conjecture and lacks the necessary evidence to proceed. My clients shouldn't have to endure a baseless attack on their integrity." Naomi countered with equal passion. "This isn't conjecture. It's a fight for justice. The evidence we presented is more than sufficient to move forward, and any attempts to delay the case are a disservice to the victims who've already suffered enough." The judge allowed the case to proceed, but Naomi knew Evelyn's strategy was far from over. Hashtag trust tested. As the weeks passed, Naomi faced another crushing blow. Several key witnesses backed out. Each cited fear of retaliation, though none would say it outright. Without their testimonies, critical parts of Naomi's case were at risk of collapsing. Late one night, Naomi sat alone in her office, staring at the dwindling list of witnesses. Doubt crept in, threatening to overshadow her determination. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, remembering the faces of the people who had come to her for help. They were counting on her, and she couldn't let them down. Devin entered the room, carrying a cup of coffee. "You're not giving up, are you?" he asked, his tone light but sincere. Naomi smiled faintly. "Not a chance. But it's hard when every step forward feels like 2 steps back." Devin hesitated before speaking. "You once told me that justice isn't about what's easy. It's about what's right. If anyone can win this, it's you." His words reignited the fire within her. She stood, determination etched into every line of her face. "Then let's keep fighting." With renewed focus, Naomi began preparing for the next phase of the case, knowing the battle had only just begun. The courtroom was electric with tension as Naomi Carter faced one of the most pivotal days in her career. The trial against Silvercrest Industries had been a grueling ordeal, with each side delivering blow after blow. Naomi had spent the night before meticulously preparing for her cross-examination of Silvercrest's Chief Operations Officer, Harold Grant, a man whose polished demeanor masked a web of deceit. As Harold took the stand, Naomi's gaze locked on him, her expression calm but intense. "Mr. Grant," she began, her voice steady, "you've testified that Silvercrest Industries followed all safety protocols and complied with environmental regulations during the operation of their manufacturing plant in Maplewood. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Harold replied confidently. Naomi nodded, flipping through a stack of documents on the prosecution's table. "And yet, the EPA fined Silvercrest $2.5 million for violations at the same plant 3 years ago. Do you recall this fine?" Harold hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "That was an isolated incident, unrelated to the disaster in question." Naomi stepped closer to the witness stand, holding up a report. This EPA report outlines multiple violations, including improper disposal of hazardous materials, violations that persisted for over a year. Would you still consider that isolated? The courtroom murmured as Harold's polished facade began to crack. He stammered, I wasn't directly involved in those decisions." "Not directly involved," Naomi echoed, her voice sharper now. "But as the Chief Operations Officer, you were responsible for overseeing the plant's compliance, were you not?" "Yes, but—" "No further questions, Your Honor," Naomi said, cutting him off and returning to her seat, satisfaction flickering in her eyes. Harold's testimony had been carefully crafted to exonerate Silvercrest, but Naomi had poked enough holes to raise serious doubts. Hashtag a desperate breakthrough. Later that evening, as Naomi reviewed the day's progress in her office, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Carter," a man's voice asked, low and hesitant. "This is she. Who's calling?" "My name is Marcus Reed. I used to work for Silvercrest." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. "Go on," she urged, keeping her tone measured. I have information, proof, actually, that Victor Langston personally approved the cost-cutting measures that caused the Maplewood disaster. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Naomi leaned forward, adrenaline coursing through her. Marcus, this could change everything. Are you willing to testify? A long pause followed. I'm scared, Marcus admitted. Langston's people don't play fair. But if it means holding him accountable, I'll do it. Naomi assured him of his protection and hung up, her mind racing. Marcus's testimony could be the key to winning the case, but it was a double-edged sword. Silvercrest's legal team would undoubtedly attack his credibility, and putting him on the stand could backfire spectacularly. Hashtag courtroom drama. The next day, Marcus took the stand, his nerves palpable but his resolve evident. As Naomi questioned him, he recounted in vivid detail the meetings where Langston dismissed safety warnings in favor of saving costs. Mr. Reed, Naomi said, can you confirm that Victor Langston was aware of the risks posed by these cost-cutting measures? Yes, Marcus replied firmly. He signed off on them personally. I was in the room when he said, profits come first. The courtroom buzzed with shock. Naomi glanced at the jury, noting the impact Marcus's words had on them. But Silvercrest lead attorney, Evelyn Hart, was ready to pounce. When it was Evelyn's turn, she approached Marcus with a predatory smile. Mr. Reed, she began, you left Silvercrest under less than amicable circumstances, didn't you? Marcus stiffened. I was let go because I refused to falsify safety reports. And yet, you didn't come forward until now, Evelyn pressed. Why the delay? Could it be because you're seeking revenge against your former employer? No, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the attack. I stayed quiet because I was scared, but I couldn't live with myself anymore. Knowing what they've done, Naomi watched intently, ready to object if Evelyn crossed a line, but Marcus held his ground, his testimony landing a critical blow against Silvercrest. Hashtag a dangerous discovery. Just as Naomi began to feel momentum shifting in her favor, she uncovered a troubling detail. Reviewing court filings late one night, she noticed an unusual pattern in the judge's rulings, an uncharacteristic leniency towards Silvercrest. It didn't make sense until Devin, her sharp-eyed intern, pieced together the connection. The judge's wife was on Silvercrest's board of directors. This can't be a coincidence, Devin said, placing the documents on Naomi's desk. Naomi felt her stomach knot. If the judge's impartiality was compromised, the entire case could be at risk. She had to tread carefully. Accusing a judge of bias without irrefutable proof could backfire and jeopardize her career. The next morning, Naomi requested a private meeting with the judge. Armed with the evidence, she presented her findings respectfully but firmly. Your Honor, she began, I'm not accusing you of misconduct, but the appearance of a conflict of interest could undermine the integrity of this case. I believe it's in everyone's best interest for you to recuse yourself. The judge's face darkened, but he ultimately agreed to step aside, allowing a new judge to take over. The courtroom drama intensified as Silvercrest's team scrambled to regain control of the narrative. Hashtag the turning point. With the new judge presiding, Naomi seized the opportunity to admit a crucial piece of evidence that had previously been blocked, an internal memo from Langston himself, acknowledging the risks of the shortcuts and instructing his team to proceed anyway. This document, Naomi told the jury, holding up the memo, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Victor Langston and Silvercrest Industries prioritize profits over human lives. The devastation in Maplewood wasn't just an accident. It was a calculated decision. The courtroom was silent as the weight of her words sank in. Naomi looked at the jury, their expressions a mix of anger and determination. She knew they understood the gravity of what had been revealed. Silvercrest's defense faltered, their arguments unable to counter the mountain of evidence Naomi had built. Marcus's testimony, combined with the internal memo, created a narrative too damning to ignore. As Naomi delivered her closing argument, her voice filled with conviction, She spoke not just for her clients, but for every community that had suffered under the unchecked power of corporations like Silvercrest. This case is about more than Maplewood, she concluded. It's about accountability. It's about justice. And it's about sending a message that no one is above the law. The jury's decision loomed, but for the first time in the trial, Naomi felt the scales tipping in her favor. The climax had arrived, and the fight was far from over. The courtroom was packed to capacity as Naomi Carter rose for her closing argument. The weight of weeks of grueling testimony, endless legal maneuvering, and the harrowing stories of the victims hung heavy in the air. Naomi knew this was her moment, the final opportunity to give voice to the families who had entrusted her with their fight for justice. She stepped forward, her calm yet commanding presence silencing the murmurs in the room. Her eyes swept across the jury, pausing briefly on each member as she began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Naomi began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "you've heard the facts. You've seen the evidence. You've listened to the stories of families who've lost everything, their homes, their livelihoods, and in some cases, their loved ones. What happened in Maplewood wasn't just a tragedy. It was a crime, a preventable disaster caused by greed and a blatant disregard for human life." She turned and gestured toward the gallery, where many of the victims sat, their faces etched with pain but also with hope. These people trusted Silvercrest Industries to operate responsibly. They trusted them to follow the law, to protect their community, and to act with decency. Instead, they were betrayed. Their trust was exploited, their safety disregarded, and their lives destroyed, all in the name of profit. Hashtag the power of storytelling. Naomi's voice grew stronger as she painted a vivid picture of the disaster's aftermath. Imagine waking up one morning to find your home covered in toxic sludge, your children coughing uncontrollably, your livelihood gone. Imagine the helplessness of knowing that the very company responsible for your suffering is too powerful to care about your pain. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the jury. But today, you have the power to change that. Today, you can send a message that no company, no matter how wealthy, no matter how influential, is above the law. Naomi turned toward the defense table, where Victor Langston sat stone-faced. Silvercrest Industries would have you believe this is complicated, that somehow they're not responsible for what happened. But it's not complicated. They knew the risks. They ignored the warnings. They chose profits over people. And now, they must be held accountable. Hashtag a pivotal verdict. Hours felt like days as the jury deliberated. Naomi sat with her clients in a quiet conference room, offering words of encouragement while silently bracing herself for the outcome. The stakes were monumental, not just for the victims, but for her career, her principles, and the countless others who might face similar battles in the future. Finally, the bailiff called everyone back into the courtroom. The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable. Naomi held her breath as the foreperson rose to deliver the verdict. "We find in favor of the plaintiffs," the foreperson announced, her voice steady but charged with significance. "And we award damages in the amount of $250 million. Gasps echoed through the room, followed by muffled sobs of relief and joy from the victims. Naomi felt her knees weaken as the words sank in. Against all odds, they had won. Victor Langston's typically impassive demeanor cracked for the first time, his jaw tightening as he processed the magnitude of the verdict. For him, the battle wasn't just lost, it was devastating. Hashtag justice beyond the courtroom. The victory sent shockwaves far beyond the courtroom walls. News outlets across the country ran headlines about the historic case, shining a harsh spotlight on Silvercrest Industries and its reckless practices. Victor Langston faced mounting pressure, and within weeks, federal prosecutors announced an investigation into his role in the disaster. Criminal charges were filed, marking a rare but significant moment of accountability for a corporate executive. Public outrage reached a fever pitch, with protests and petitions calling for stricter laws to prevent similar tragedies. Lawmakers, spurred by the case's widespread attention, began drafting legislation to close regulatory loopholes and impose harsher penalties on corporations that endangered public safety. Naomi's victory was more than just a legal triumph. It became a rallying cry for justice and reform. Hashtag a transformative impact. Back at her firm, the mood had shifted dramatically. The same colleagues who had once doubted Naomi now celebrated her as a trailblazer. Her unwavering commitment to justice and her ability to take on a seemingly unwinnable case had elevated the firm's reputation and inspired a renewed sense of purpose among her peers. Naomi, however, remained humble. She knew the fight wasn't hers alone. It belonged to the victims who had entrusted her with their stories and to the young lawyers she now mentored, encouraging them to use their skills for good. One evening, as Naomi packed up her office after a long day, Devin Miles, her bright and eager intern, stopped by. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I just wanted to say thank you. Watching you handle this case has been the most inspiring experience of my life. I hope someday I can make a difference like you did." Naomi smiled, her heart full. "You will, Devin. Just remember, it's not about winning. It's about doing what's right, no matter the odds." Hashtag a lasting legacy. Months later, Naomi returned to Maplewood, where the community was beginning to rebuild. She walked through the once devastated neighborhood, now buzzing with activity as homes were repaired and businesses reopened. A young boy ran up to her, clutching a drawing he had made. "Are you the lawyer who helped my mom?" he asked shyly. "I am," Naomi replied, kneeling to his level. "Thank you," he said, handing her the drawing, a simple but heartfelt depiction of a courtroom with Naomi standing victorious. Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she hugged the boy. In that moment, she was reminded of why she had chosen this path. The case had been grueling, the odds daunting, but the impact was undeniable. As she walked away, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for justice was far from over, but Naomi Carter was ready for whatever came next. She had proven that one person, armed with courage and conviction, could make an extraordinary difference, and that was a victory worth fighting for. In the weeks following the groundbreaking verdict, Naomi Carter found herself revisiting Maplewood, the community that had once seemed so hopeless, now on its way to recovery. The towering buildings of Silvercrest Industries loomed in the distance, but they no longer held the same menacing power. The scars left by the disaster were still visible, but there was a new energy, a sense of resilience that had emerged in the wake of her victory. Naomi stood at the heart of the neighborhood, a place once devastated by corporate negligence, now teeming with life and promise. As she walked down the street, children played in the newly repaired playground, their laughter echoing in the air. Businesses that had been on the brink of closure were opening their doors once again, with local vendors setting up shop and families rebuilding their homes. Naomi's heart swelled with a quiet sense of pride. The fight she had taken on, the battle that had seemed impossible, had sparked a real, tangible change. She paused at a street corner, watching the community come to life around her. A small voice broke through her thoughts. Turning, Naomi saw a little girl, no older than 7 or 8, holding out a folded piece of paper. "Excuse me, are you Naomi Carter?" the girl asked timidly. Naomi smiled warmly. "I am. How are you, sweetie?" The girl's eyes brightened. "I made you something," she said, shyly handing over the folded card. Naomi opened it to reveal a simple but heartfelt drawing, a courtroom scene with Naomi standing at the center, a victorious smile on her face, surrounded by happy people. At the bottom of the card, the words, "Thank you for saving our town," were scrawled in crayon. Naomi felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at the card. The gratitude in the little girl's eyes, the innocence of the drawing, it was all a reminder of why she had fought so hard. It wasn't just for the legal victory. It was for the lives that had been changed, for the families that could now rebuild, for the children who could dream of a brighter future. With a smile, Naomi knelt down and gave the girl a hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're the reason I did this." Hashtag the ripple effect of change. Naomi's victory went far beyond the courtroom. News outlets continued to cover the aftermath of the case, and Silvercrest's once untouchable reputation was in tatters. As criminal investigations into Victor Langston unfolded, the corporation was forced to reckon with the consequences of its actions. The case became a rallying cry for those fighting against corporate corruption and environmental destruction. But Naomi's story was just beginning. Weeks after the trial, Naomi received an unexpected invitation. The letter was from the United States Congress, inviting her to testify before a special committee focused on corporate accountability and environmental justice. The committee had been convened in direct response to the impact of the Maplewood case. Naomi's testimony would play a key role in shaping future laws to protect vulnerable communities from corporate malfeasance. As she read the letter, Naomi's hands trembled slightly. She had never imagined that her fight for justice would take her to such a place of influence. The case had been personal, but the ripple effect was something far greater than she could have anticipated. She was now in a position to affect change on a national scale. She felt a mix of awe and responsibility. This wasn't just about one community anymore. This was about setting a precedent, about ensuring that future generations wouldn't face the same kind of devastation that the people of Maplewood had endured. Naomi's resolve grew stronger. The battle for justice was far from over, but it had taken a monumental step forward. Hashtag a personal reflection. Later that evening, Naomi sat alone in her office, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She ran her fingers over the letter of invitation, the weight of it sinking in. Her thoughts drifted back to the early days of the case, to the skepticism she had faced, the isolation she had felt. She had been called naive, unrealistic, and even foolish for taking on Silvercrest Industries. But in the end, it was that very belief in justice, an unwavering faith that what was right could prevail, that had carried her through. Naomi had fought for more than just a legal victory. She had fought for the dignity and rights of every person who had suffered at the hands of those who saw them as expendable. In her mind, the faces of the victims flashed before her. The grieving mother who had lost her child, the small business owner who had been forced into bankruptcy, the young boy who had handed her the drawing. These were the faces of justice. These were the faces of change. Naomi leaned back in her chair, a quiet sense of accomplishment washing over her. She had done what many thought impossible. She had taken on a powerful corporation and won, not just for the victims in Maplewood, but for every community that had been wronged, every underdog who had been told their fight was hopeless. Hashtag a legacy of hope and inspiration. As Naomi prepared for her testimony before Congress, she reflected on the larger significance of her victory. It was no longer just about one case or one community. It was about setting a standard for accountability, ensuring that no corporation could ever again escape the consequences of their actions. Her victory had already begun to inspire others. Young lawyers from across the country reached out to her, eager to learn from her experience and to follow in her footsteps. Naomi became a mentor to many, offering guidance and encouragement to those who were ready to challenge the status quo, to take on the powerful forces that sought to crush the voices of the vulnerable. But Naomi's work wasn't finished. As she stood before Congress, preparing to testify, she knew that there were still countless battles to be fought. There would be more corporations to hold accountable, more victims to represent, more injustices to challenge. But for the first time, Naomi felt a sense of peace. She had proven that one person could make a difference. One person, armed with integrity, conviction, and an unwavering commitment to justice, could change the course of history. Her story was just beginning, and as she stepped forward into the next chapter, Naomi Carter became a symbol of hope, a beacon for underdogs everywhere who refused to give up, who stood tall in the face of adversity and who believed, like she did, that justice was always worth fighting for. Did Naomi's journey inspire you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how her story touched you. If you believe in standing up for justice, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories, and don't forget to hit the bell icon for notifications. Let's keep the conversation going and inspire each other